All right, folks. Well, it's Monday, so it must be a stream with James Shore and myself doing pair programming. Welcome, everyone.
Awesome. Hi, everyone.
So if for those of you who tuned in to my solo stream yesterday, I spent it took way too long to do some of the database stuff. Oh my gosh.
Thank you for taking that hit,
Oh my
taking one for the
God.
team.
Every time I do it, I figured, all right, I'm going to go like the simple way. I'm going to use H2. I'm not going to worry about test containers and Postgres. I'm going to like use JPA so I don't have to write the schema and figure out how to translate it. And I was like, oh my God. And the documentation, every time I do it, I'm always like, okay, I got to figure out another place to look for recipe. But I really need, so one of the things I've concluded is that recipes are really important. I mean, that's really what makes Stack Overflow so valuable, I think, is it's just like, here's a recipe, plug it in, copy and paste it, and see if that works, and worry about, hopefully learn about what it does later. But
Yeah.
there's so many things that we do. I don't know if it's probably true for you for different things that, you don't do them very often. Like the database stuff I do once whenever I'm doing something, and like especially from scratch, and then I don't do it again for like 3 months or 6 months, and I've forgotten everything.
Yeah. No, so I think spiking is really good for this. And what I do, a lot of people, so Spike Solutions, for those of you who aren't familiar with them, it's basically a piece of throwaway code that demonstrates how to do something, like a database or something else. Hey, Suiji, welcome. And a lot of people throw away their spikes, but I figure it out. Typically, if there's like, man, I hate figuring out third-party code because you always so always this stuff. How do we make it work? Why isn't it working in this special case? This thing's not working. So I'll do that in a spike rather than my actual code, a little standalone program to just make the thing work. Typically, I'll start with a tutorial if they've got one or sample code. But then I'll edit it and I'll like, well, what is this thing that they're doing? Oh, that's magic stuff that tries to make it look really cool. Take that out. Does it still work? No, I've got to put in this sort of supporting thing that their magic was hiding, but now I understand how it really works. And I'll do that until I get it down to like a really simple case of this is how it actually works. Not all the magic stuff they use to make it look pretty and be viral, but the stuff that actually makes it go. And then I will check that in. I have a spikes folder.
Yeah.
And then in the future, when I want to do that thing again, that's there for me to look at. So that's how I approach it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to get more organized about that myself. Like time leaf, I know, is one of those areas where it's like the documentation is hit or miss, and it's just like I just want to put some checkboxes on the page. How do I do that? And so I basically have started being, basically saving those sort of little spikes. I guess I never thought about a spike, but it's absolutely a spike. And turning them into recipes. And I have basically a book in progress that I've been sort of working on and off, just to, every time I like, oh, now I have to relearn this, I go and say, did I already write this? If so, then great. If not, okay, I need to go write this. And what I like about that is that means that writing is from the beginner's mind. Because it's like, I'm new to this again. And so let me write down what I had forgotten and that I've just relearned, so that the next time I can do it. And then hopefully, eventually when I do publish it, other people will find it useful.
Yeah. Hey, Charlie, welcome.
Pancakes.
I don't know. Are you talking about the one that I got the URL wrong, Charlie? Because that was that one has been deleted. Yeah, I think that book idea, that sounds like a great idea.
And I'm thinking about maybe I should do that for the database stuff, because I know I'm just going to encounter it again. Although I really don't want to do it for JPA, because I honestly think that JPA, which is basically Hibernate, should just die. I think it's trying to do too much that maybe was relevant when you were running on like a single machine, especially desktop. Or a server that needed to keep stuff in. I don't know. I think it like I keep asking people who are using it, it's like, are you actually using all the functionality that Hibernate has? It has a whole lot of functionality. And we're like, no. And I'm like, well, then why are people still using it? So someday somebody will explain it to me.
So it looks like I sent, oh, that's weird. I just realized I tweeted something very strange. Thanks for letting me know about that. Charlie, that is a cut and paste error. Let me try that again.
I thought that was a bug in my Twitter client because it popped up on my iPad and it gives me a preview and I'm like, that looks weird, but I thought it was me. Apparently not.
Yeah. All right. Well,
hey, it got people's attention.
It got people's attention. I'll just delete that one. Delete. All right. Thanks, Charlie. Yeah. And welcome.
I was like,
when I was doing the first edition of my book for a while as part of like just, spreading the awareness, I had published a haiku for each section in the book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and my eventual goal was I was going to collect all these haikus and I was going to like tell the story of the book. I never finished that, but you can still find them on my website under the AOAD1 section. Which reminds me, I am putting together a training course for the Nullables stuff. It's gotten a lot of attention. People are interested in having some live instructor-led training. So, hey, Whiskey. Hey, Hamzaj. So that is, keep an eye on my website, jamesshore.com. That's going to go up this week, I think. Fingers crossed. I've just got to get all the, I'm going to put together a little video, get all the ducks in a row. But if you're interested in this stuff and you'd like to do lots of hands-on coding regarding it, I will have that up. I'll probably have more to say about it on Monday, but in the meantime, you can follow jamesshore.com to see it when it comes up.
Cool. And speaking of things like that, coming up on February 16th, I'm talking about hexagonal architecture, but I'm now calling it hexagonal architecture and friends. So something that I've been doing as James and I have been pairing, and I've been really thinking about like really focusing on like, why do I care about the architecture stuff? Same reason James does is testability. How to, testability and organization of code. And that really and I teach this course to big corporations and I almost feel bad when I get to the hexagonal architecture part because I'm like, I know you're not going to be able to apply this because there were some of them are working on
because they've already got an architecture.
They've got an ad hoc, horrible architecture of 15, 20-year-old legacy code. And so, the separation of concerns is like, and so sort of refocusing a bit on saying that's what we want. And then sort of, there are then a variety of ways to do it, but that underlying principle, I think, is really key.
And where's that? That's February 16th, you said? Coming up pretty soon now, then.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Where's that going to be at?
It's going to be, I'm trying to find I had a command for it. I'll have to find it. It's the Philly XP. I'll post a link for it somewhere as soon as I can find it.
Oh yeah, I think you had mentioned that in a previous previous time.
And I submitted a whole bunch. So there's the KCDC conference that happens somewhere later this year. So I submitted a whole bunch of talks to that. We'll see if any get accepted.
Mm-hmm. Well, as long as we're plugging talks, there is here in Portland, there is a live Pacific Northwest Software Quality Conference. And I believe next week there's going to be sort of a kickoff for this year's conference, which is much later in the year. Which they're going to be doing a bunch of lightning talks, and I'm going to be there talking about FAST, which is fluid scaling technology. It's I haven't officially gotten on the program yet, but they've asked me to submit. So if you haven't heard of FAST or if you haven't seen FAST and you're in the Portland area, come check it out. I think it's also going to be live streamed somehow. I'm not sure of the details.
Yep.
Anyway, so yeah, databases. You spend a lot of time refiguring out databases. Why don't you show me what you've got, what you figured out?
All right, let's do that. So I know we've been referring to the memento pattern, and I want to emphasize that it's memento like technically memento pattern, and I get pedantic about this mainly because I get upset when I see other people take a pattern and sort of change it. And so I want to say that it's not quite memento, because memento is not supposed to be serialized outside of sort of the owner. That it's basically the original idea with memento was, you know, save it off in a buffer that you could undo or redo later, and that the only thing that needed it was the thing that already owned it. Here, what we're actually trying to do is externalize the state and serialize it. And Mark Grand, in his book from way long ago, called a snapshot. So this is more, although he was talking about using Java's serialization mechanism, which is just awful. Don't do that. Yeah,
that's you know, I wrote an actual distributed app using Java's serialization structure. That was, remember how last time I told you about Corba?
Right.
Well, next project after that, well, a couple of things went by, and then I got hired to do this desktop app in Java and Swing. And I think it was Swing. May have still been the original Java desktop UI, which wasn't Swing, but I think it was.
It was probably Swing. Swing's been.
Yeah, it was probably Swing. Yeah, and we did that with distributed architecture using Java serialization. It actually worked. It worked pretty well. It was a small little thing, but it wasn't terrible. I wouldn't use it today, but it wasn't terrible.
Yeah, the main problem is just how do you version it, and the versioning and things like that. And plus, there's a whole host of never-ending security bugs. So, yeah. Well, So Whiskey Sierra says AWT. It's like, I doubt you were doing it in AWT.
We might have been doing it in AWT.
Really?
Actually.
Okay.
I think we were using AWT, but we might have been using Swing. That was a long time ago. I don't remember any of this.
Yeah, that would...
But I think Corba and the Java serialization, you know, late 90s, there was this idea of distributed objects, which an object database.
An object database. Gemstone was the one.
Yeah, I worked with Gemstone. I tried using an object database, and I really love the idea because, of course, you've got this object relational impedance mismatch, which is what we're dealing with, which is that objects are not the structure of a relational database.
Right. Good objects.
Yeah.
Not those.
Let's not talk about writing COBOL in Java, which is procedural programming.
Right.
I had somebody ask me recently about, do nullables work with a functional? Or no, I was talking about the problem with dependency injection frameworks, and they said, well, isn't that functional programming? I was like, what? And what they were talking about was procedural programming. Which, of course, procedural programming involves working with data structures and functions. So that looks like functional programming. But functional programming, of course, is functions as first-class citizens, typically without side effects in the pure case. Anyway, where was I going with that? Oh, yeah, distributed objects. I think it was just a poor idea. Yeah. Object databases, distributed objects. The idea that your behavior goes with your state makes things really, really complicated. Yeah. I think it's a great way to organize your code within a process, but once you start trying to send that across multiple processes, you've got security issues, you got all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
I think the simple RPC model, whether you wrap that up behind an HTTP call and call it REST, or whether you do it, or whether you just say, hey, I'm running this thing which is going to run some code for me on my behalf. That simple structure is, I think, just your fundamental building block, and works really well for distributed programming.
All right. So go ahead.
I'm just responding to Suiji. You said that Joe Rainsberger says that constructor call and partial functional application are the same thing. I think they're conceptually the same. I think they share some interesting similarities, and I think you can do objects. I think functions with closures and objects are kind of interchangeable. So yeah, I mean, Joe and I agree on a lot of stuff. I'm sure if he was on this stream right now, he could convince me that was true, but I'm not sure if I completely buy it.
To me, that's one of those things like, that's interesting, but now what?
Yeah,
now what do I do?
Yeah, so what?
I mean, it's fun to talk about some of that stuff, but ultimately it's like, okay, what are we trying to do? How does that help us?
I will say that something the functional style has definitely influenced my design sense.
Hmm.
In that over time, I've moved to a much more functional style of object-oriented programming. I still think encapsulation is one of the most powerful design techniques that exists.
Yeah.
So I love objects. I love the encapsulation. But I also think immutability is a really powerful design tool.
Yep. Yep.
So I've moved to immutable objects as one of my sort of key approaches, except when it makes life more difficult.
Right.
Because in a lot of languages, there isn't good first-class support for immutability. So then I will treat them as immutable, but not actually program them to be immutable, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's been my tendency as well. I think for me in Java, it means that I can worry less about concurrency issues.
Yeah.
So that was sort of my primary driver for that. And then I got more into DDD and value objects and things like that. Then a lot of things just naturally were like, oh, that's just a value object, so it's immutable.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like JavaScript for the concurrency story because you only have one program thread at any time. It makes reasoning about concurrency so easy. And then you've got await async, and the under the covers, you've got multi-processing and multi-threading. But the programming model is single thread per process. And if you want to use more cores, then you just spawn out multiple processes. And it turns out to be a really nice way to think about the world. And because it's got the await async, is actually very performant as compared to something like Ruby, where you'd lock up the entire processor.
Yeah.
Responding to a web request and talking to a database.
Yep. All right, so let's look at the code. So what we've got here is, so I didn't create tables. I basically didn't even create the schema. My goal was I just want to store this in a database. So where we ended up, thanks to Whiskey Sierra and Sweegie and some others on the stream, we now have. Well, let me actually start with the snapshot first, the memento, and then we'll look at see how we get there. So the memento, although I'm really tempted to now rename it, but we'll leave it for now. So there's a method on game that now says, "Hey, give me your memento." It doesn't. It basically. So we'd originally thought, oh, let me basically have game delegate all of its data interaction to the memento, but then it felt really weird from an encapsulation standpoint. So I said, no, it has state the way it always does. It's internal. It's directly accessed. But when you want a memento for persistence, you ask for a memento. You get a memento. It's an inner. In this case, it's an inner record, so it's immutable, which is nice for it's very concise. And during the stream, there was sort of some thought about how domain rich versus how close to what's friendly for persistence did I want to make it. And I ended up where it is now is fairly close to what's convenient for persistence in this case. Even though I was trying to figure out whose job is it to translate domain concepts into something that eventually will be written, serialized, whatever is gonna happen with it. And it felt like this was a good intermediary. So I'd be curious what you think. So we ended up with, well, Boolean stays Boolean. Roles gets sort of unwrapped, as it were, into an int. The last role, which actually I need to rename, this is the hand of the current hand. It gets unwrapped into a list of integer. Scoreboard has its own memento. And so that was, I tried it both ways. I tried flattening it even further, so it returned actually just a map, but that turned out to be really awkward. So its memento basically is pretty much one thing, which is just the map. And again, sort of flattening the hands for each score category. So it turned out we didn't want to actually store the score for each. If I assign a role to a category, I don't want to store the score. I actually want to store the hand that was assigned to it, because we can always figure out the score from that. But I wanted to know what hand was actually assigned to that category.
Yeah, I can see that because that will. Yeah, I think there's two ways to think about that. Um, by storing the intermediate results, it means that the score can change from day to day. Like if we persist and then come back a week later and the logic has changed, the score will have changed. Now, is that a good thing because we fixed a bug, or
Right.
is it a bad thing because? But as I think about it, I'm inclined to agree with you. We want to store. I always think that storing, like caching, is one of the three hard problems in computer science,
Hmm.
or two hard problems
Two
in
hard
computer
problems.
science.
Off by
The
one.
other
Yeah.
one being off by one errors and naming. The so storing the calculated score is effectively caching the result in the
Right.
database.
Right.
Um,
And
this question.
and it
Go
felt
ahead.
very much like almost event sourcing, like we're not storing the final result, and like all this stuff is interrelated. It's really fascinating. Like we're storing, here is the thing the user did,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to what was the result of what the user did. And
Right.
and caching is basically a way of looking at that as well. And so it's interesting how all that stuff relates.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh
Oh
yeah. Welcome.
yay.
Um. So
Yeah,
yeah, I
so
think.
so this is the memento.
Mhm.
The mapping the mapping was fun.
I
Got
want to say that.
to use the two map twice.
Oh,
That was fun.
that's weird. Um, the question of how friendly do we make this for distributed the persistence, I think is a really interesting one, because I find that when you try to go really sort of dogmatic about this is the pure design, you make your life really difficult.
Yeah, yeah,
And actually, the right thing to do is to think of your application as a whole and sort of like, oh, I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of purity here to make my
right.
life way easier over
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
So I would definitely agree that we don't need this memento. I like snapshot as well. Um, uh, we don't need this snapshot to be like pure from a domain perspective. Really,
right.
what we need it to be is something that works with our persistence,
Yeah,
and we'll figure out what the right way to do that is.
and one of the things that I've been trying to do more, especially in the ensembles that I run, is if there's an idea and immediately I'm like, no, I don't think it'll work, or that's going to be ugly. I'm much more willing to say, okay, if it's something fairly straightforward that's not going to sidetrack us too much, let's do it and see what it looks like. And we did that for some of these values, and it was like, wow, that's really painful and awkward, so let's not do it that way. And I agree, like I tend to be somewhat dogmatic and pedantic about purity and stuff like that, and so finding that balance is not always easy.
Yeah.
But
And something to be careful about, because I'll say, well, you
yeah,
don't need to be dogmatic, but at the same time, I'm way more dogmatic than most people are.
yeah,
So when I say you don't need to be dogmatic, what I mean is, ratchet it down from, oh my God, to, wow, that's extreme,
right, right,
not,
right,
and when I say YOLO, I'm saying like, let's take 60 seconds to try to do something and see if the test still passed.
right.
Like
It's
there's a
all
lot
on
of programmers I
on a
meet that
spectrum.
are in a different level of the
Yeah,
spectrum, and they
yeah,
really shouldn't be hearing "Don't be dogmatic." They need to
right.
be a lot more dogmatic.
Yes, yes. Yeah, it's all perspective of where you currently are. It's like, oh, that seems really loosey goosey, and then somebody else would say, "What the heck? That's
Yeah,
so dogmatic. What are you doing?"
yeah. Um, so you've made the mementos. I get that. So what's happening over here on the left? Or did you want to? Maybe I'll let you sort of
Yeah,
show
so
it
I
to me
wanted
at
to
your
start
own
with
pace.
the memento. So what happens is we basically then those mementos are handed off to the game DBO, is
Which
responsible,
is
which is
what does
the
DBO stand for?
database object.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
So because I've tried different naming conventions. I used to call it entity. It's like, no, that was way confusing, despite the fact that entity is the annotation that's used. And it's more than a DTO. It's a very specific, it's still an object, but anyway. So this is the thing that actually gets used by JPA, by Hibernate, to store it in in a table, or actually in several tables.
And this is where all of our magic is, and so forth.
Yeah, so this is where all the magic element collection creates another table and manages it for you. With a one-to-many creates another table, and it stores these. And so there's basically two methods that are the translation methods from a domain object game, converted into a game DBO. So it grabs the memento and then basically just does a bunch of work to translate that into the various pieces. And then reverse from given a game DBO instance, give me the domain object of it, and it converts it the other way. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then we basically have some tests that basically just verify that we can actually read and write, and that it works correctly. There's some funky stuff with IDs. The constraint of there only being one actually was a fun problem to solve, but we got it. So there's an implicit identifier that's handled by the thing that actually stores it in the database. So these are the objects, the game DBO. There's the scored category DBO. It just basically has the scored category, the enum, and then the hand of dice that gets stored and associated with that.
So can you show me the schema that we ended up with?
I can't show you the schema because it's generated on the fly. I can give you a sense of what it looks like, but it's basically auto-generated by Hibernate.
Okay. Yeah, that doesn't, I don't like that. I want to know, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm always working with databases that exist, right? I don't want this automagic mapping. I want to say, this is the schema I have, and this is the code I have. And I want to be able to say things like, this is my query. Like, I want to write my query. I don't want to have it automatically generated for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, Spring Data JPA does that for you. You can create the schema. I just didn't get there because it was hard enough for me just to remember how to do the magic incantations.
Yeah, well, once again, I really appreciate you taking one for the team and figuring all this out before we got pairing,
right?
So we could, stay focused on sort of the more impactful stuff.
Yeah, so there's a way we could examine the schema, and I would not, in anything that would approach production, anything that you would deploy, I would not do it this way, because you'll eventually want to migrate and modify your database schema. So if that's something we want to do, I may just extract the schema and redo it manually so that we can see what that looks like.
The problem with magic is leaky abstractions. Is eventually, whenever you're interfacing with the outside world is expecting a very specific thing, and eventually your magic will not produce the very specific thing it expects, and then you're in trouble. Then it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just when I build an infrastructure wrapper, which is effectively what we're doing here, whether we call it a repository or not, it's basically an infrastructure wrapper, just like our service calls are an infrastructure wrapper. Whenever I build an infrastructure wrapper, I start from the perspective of, this is what the outside world looks like and expects. And the job of the infrastructure wrapper is to translate my stuff to that outside world. And I don't care so much how that translation is done, but the entire purpose of the infrastructure wrapper is to do that translation. And so all the tests are around, here's what the outside world is, here's what's the inside world is, and I want to see that it's going back and forth.
Right.
So not knowing what the schema is makes me very nervous. I'm like, oh my God, how can we not know the schema of what's in our database?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think especially with the overemphasis on microservices, there's a lot of, we almost don't care sort of a lot about the database, or we're using even a document database. And so it's interesting to see the different different ways of thinking about that. Thinking about databases is instead of being some big complex enterprise thing, which is what I grew up in sort of my career starting out with, especially at eBay, where you had enterprise-wide databases and you had to get change board approval for adding
DBAs,
yeah, and
fighting with the DBAs,
and then sitting with the DBAs during rollout to watch them press the right buttons. It's a very, very different universe, and that's only 15 years ago.
I mean, maybe times have changed, but even so, if I'm calling a microservice, I don't care how the microservice is persisting its data. I trust it. Encapsulation, it's fundamental design principle. But if I'm writing a microservice that has a database, then I still am going to want to know what the schema is. And maybe I'm using, I was looking at Django the other day, and it has a really nice approach to databases. I really liked it. But even still, I want to know what that schema is, and I want to document that schema.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, as I was imagining what we might do today, I was thinking, well, of course, we're going to want to write tests of our adapter, of our infrastructure wrapper. And one of the things I want to put in it is what happens when we have two rows pointing to the same game that have the same score category in them. Like, what I want to see what happens. Like, I want to write that test,
mm-hmm.
and then I want to document what happens and how the code responds, because it is possible for databases to get corrupted, for them to get bad. I think actually the state of data, the true natural state of the database is corruption, is to have data that is not quite right. And your code has to be able to deal with that, because if you assume that the world is always going to be perfect, then you're going to go down.
Right. So
Whiskey asks, is it important to know the schema to make the adapter nullable? No, it's not. But I was actually hoping that we would do more than just make the adapter nullable, that we'd actually do some proper narrow integration tests on it. Now, it looks like you've already written a whole bunch of the tests and done a lot of work on the repository here.
Not a lot of tests. In fact, the tests are fairly... they're fairly... I don't know. Basically, they're much longer and doing more things than I would do in a typical test. And there's only for this one, there's only basically one of them is basically so this is more about, have I set up my annotations correctly for this GameDBO object? And if I were writing the schema manually, have I written the schema correctly that matches what is expected by the object relational mapper? And here it's like, can I set an ID, and does it save it, and are we able to find it by that ID? And sort of all these things about basically it's to me it's almost I sometimes call these sort of framework configuration tests. Like, have I configured stuff according to the way the framework wants it? And that's really what this test is about. And then there's one other test, which is more about, or two other tests, is just, does the domain object get translated properly in both directions? So if I save it, and then the saved one should be equal to what was stored, and then I can find it, and that should be equal to the original as well. And then so basically, can I save, create new, and can I update? And those are the three tests that I wrote.
What's the difference between game repository JPA adapter and game JPA repository?
So the repository itself, this is the one that has the Spring magic, the Spring data magic. So this behind the scenes or at runtime generates all the code necessary to do all the magic. So this basically says there is create all the code needed to do save and various find methods for storing this object, GameDBO, indexed with a primary key of this value.
I see. So that's an implementation detail then.
Yes.
Of the game repository JPA adapter.
Right. So this is the technical. This is what our stuff is sort of the thing that actually touches infrastructure.
On the right-hand side, can you open up game repository JPA adapter? So this is the actual code.
Yep.
I presume. And once and all the work is actually happening in the DBOs.
Right.
So doing the save and the find is really straightforward because you just use the JPA repository and it just magically works and you tell it to save.
Right.
Then you convert it to a domain object. And then you've got a find, which I can see why that would give you trouble. Yeah. What is or else throw to?
So this is because this is an optional. Because the find could return an empty optional. This is basically saying it's basically unwrapping the optional and saying if there's nothing to unwrap, throw an exception. Otherwise, go ahead and call a to domain method on it.
Got it. So this is going to be super easy to make nullable because all we're going to do is make a stubbed game JPA repository that has a save and a find by ID method, and that's it. That's I mean, it's the exact same as what we've done with the other adapters. So what I was thinking we could do today, and I want you to push back real hard if this is going to like take us down a rabbit hole. But we've been doing a lot of these nullables, and we've been working with existing infrastructure wrappers and that haven't had tests. And I've said, well, normally I would put tests around this, but let's not, because that would take a lot of time. I was thinking it might be interesting to do like proper infrastructure tests, so which I call narrow integration tests for this. Would you be up for doing that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
like
you've got a JPA adapter test and a JPA repository test. Now you haven't written any code on JPA repository. So what's in the JPA repository test?
Again, this was more about
do the DBOs work?
Basically, do the DBOs work? Because like I was tweeting about earlier, is like I tend to write the code where it's convenient and then refactor it and move it around. So all the code about the conversion was all in this save method. It was in 30, 40 lines of code and extracted it out to these conversion methods. But I basically wrote this test to drive the conversion to and from code, and that's why there's.
So would you be okay setting aside the work you did and treating it like a spike and us starting from sort of the beginning and test driving one of these database wrappers?
Sure.
Is everything checked in? Because this may fail horribly.
Yes, everything's
what I want to do may not be a good idea.
Everything's committed and pushed and all tests pass, so we're in good shape.
Okay, so for this to work, if we were to do it the way I would do it, we have to have the ability to execute arbitrary SQL against the database.
Okay.
Do we have that ability?
I can get that ability.
Okay.
So I can, let's see, services. Oops.
So people are constantly asking me, well, how do I do nullables with the database? And my answer is always the same: is, well, if you can put it inside of an infrastructure wrapper, then it's just like anything else. And if you can't, well, if you're using something in like Hibernate in the pure form, then you're not out of luck. But now things get a lot more complicated because you don't have anything to make nullable, right? Now what you have to do is you have to make all your domain code nullable. And it's certainly possible, but it's an entirely different problem. But if you have an adapter like we do, then it's actually really straightforward and no different than what we've already done.
Yeah. Do I have Docker running? I think I have Docker running. Or I don't have Docker running. Hold on, let's see. Oh, I rebooted. I don't have Docker running. Let me get Docker up. We're going to write a SQL injection. Sweet asks about Prisma. Are you familiar with Prisma? I've heard of it.
I've heard of it. I don't remember what the context was. I don't even remember what it is. But I hear about a lot of things. So if I go look it up, I might remember some more.
Okay, so containers.
Well, Google says Prisma Health when I look up Prisma, so that's probably not it. Oh, next generation for ORM for Node and TypeScript. No, I'm not particularly familiar with that. I have, I think some company I've worked with used it because it definitely rings a bell, but I'm not very familiar with it.
So let's see. Whoops.
Hey, Hunter1, that's my password too.
Let me just grab something else here. So Postgres password. This should be what it is. There we go. All right, so that's there. We can now actually run okay. Close now, and there we go. Okay, so we do have now basically a console connection to the Postgres running inside of a Docker container.
Awesome, thank you. There's a couple of hours of futzing around. So what was the DDL that you copied?
Oh, it was basically nothing. Okay. I just wanted it to open up the console.
Okay. So let's start by, what I think we're going to do is we'll start doing this and then we'll pull in the code you've already written. I don't want to redo all that work. Mm-hmm. But what I want to do is sort of test drive it, and that we'll write a test that forces us to have the need for it, and then we'll pull it in.
Okay.
But the way I would approach this is definitely different than the way you've approached it so far. So let's start by just creating a new test file to represent the thing, to represent sort of another way of looking at it. And let's call it, you already have a game repository, right? No, you have a game repository JPA adapter.
You're right. I've got the adapter, the underlying interface, which is the Spring Data interface. The technical interface is the game JPA repository. Game repository does exist as an interface. That's my port. And I do have an in-memory implementation of that as well.
Okay.
Because that was
so. Can you open up the file tree?
Make this bigger.
Yeah. So you put that under an out adapter. So let's make a new one. Scroll up a little bit further if you would. Yeah, let's make a new folder called, let's see, I'm trying to decide, again, I'm just sort of, I'm trying to basically set the JPA stuff aside, not saying that it's wrong, but just saying, well, if we were to start this from scratch, what would it look like? And I would either call it game database or game repository. I'd probably, because I like names that are really, really straightforward, I'd probably call it game database or just database. What do you think about calling it game database?
I'm fine with that. I think it makes it clear that it's not a repository.
Yeah.
So,
well, it is going to be a repository, but
but it's not this repository.
It's not this one. Yeah. So yeah, let's make a new folder under out called game database.
Is that going to be
for that reason, by
package?
the way, your other, I'm sorry.
Is that going to be the package for?
Well, actually, we're going to, yeah, that's going to be a package.
Okay. What?
And by the way, if I were naming, for example, average score and die roller, I would call it average score service and die roller service for the same reason, just to be really crystal clear about what thing it was.
Yeah, so because here it's under adapter by definition, it's an external service.
Yeah. Okay, so let's make a test for that. So I imagine you'll have to make a new package under your test structure as well.
Yeah, I can do that.
Something I do that a lot of people don't do is I keep my tests and my production code in the same tree because I find that it's just much more convenient to have them next to each other, so I can click them both at the same time.
Yeah, I've had some discussions with that. I mean, that's historical Java Maven standard directory layout is having the two separate because of the way Java builds binaries. That they having them if they were in the same directory, then the build system would have to do more work to exclude those from the resulting jar.
Yeah, and I do use a naming convention of starting with an underscore, and then I just exclude everything that starts with an underscore.
Yeah. Other languages like Go don't do the same thing. They have the tests in the same directory, but we're in Java, so we do what Java does.
Hey, Pellet. Well, I mean, that's just how I did it when I was in Java too. It's just I'm willing to go to more work to make the build work the way I want it to, rather than conforming to the build, which does make my life more difficult in some other ways.
Yeah, I tend to be like for me it's just second nature, so I don't notice it anymore because I end up almost never manually create the packages. I basically create the class, have it put it in the package, and then it creates the package for me. So I typically don't notice it. Got it.
Okay, so let's make a new test under game database. Hey, Pellet, welcome. Did I say that already?
Yeah, I think you did.
Well, good to see you.
Yeah, Sweetie. Yeah, you have to be careful. Don't put it in the wrong folder. That's a mistake.
So I do like the name. So technically, the repository pattern is not what I'm imagining here. And I've been meaning to go back and look in domain-driven design and look up what is the actual repository pattern. Because I'm like you. Like if I'm going to use a phrase, I want to use it correctly.
Yeah.
And
yeah, ironically, the repository pattern matches JPA somewhat closely because the idea is it's just a collection. That how it gets persisted is sort of implementation detail that you don't see. But it turns out, I think that actually because of when it was written, I think for me the more important aspect of repository is less about almost the implementation and more about what its scope is, and this gets into aggregates, and I think that's for me what I found much more useful is to think about what is the thing, the set of objects, what is that, the one object that holds all these other objects, what is that unit of transaction or unit of consistency that I want to save and restore.
I would probably normally call this game repository, but since you already have an interface called game repository, just to avoid name conflicts, let's call it the test game database test for now. And then we can rename. Once we go down this route a little further and it either succeeds or fails, because I have not done this with Java and I'm not sure how it's going to work out. Then we will merge the two approaches in some way.
Right.
And at that point, we can sort of fix up our names. So
I just want to say, so Whiskey Sierra, like you can look at this from the packages point of view, and it basically then combines it. And then you rely on the coloring of the background, because anything in green in this green background is test. I don't know why I don't use this view more often. I think most people
it's much nicer.
Most people are used to this view because there's other files that you have to deal with. But this is sort of the more true way of looking at it. So let's I'm going to keep this tree and see how it works.
I always keep my file viewer in file mode, and that's because precisely what you said. When things go wrong, having a sort of filtered view of the system, I will like, well, why isn't this working? And then I'm like, oh, well, that's not where I thought it was. So you've probably noticed this by now. A lot of my stuff is, let's talk about the thing that we're actually doing. Let's not pretend to do something else, because I've had so many experiences of leaky abstractions, of having stuff not be what the system says it would. So I just want to have it be as straightforward and reality-based as possible.
So Pellet brings up my as a prefix, and it's really interesting naming conventions over the years. I remember when I was at Google, for instance variables, we would use the prefix my. So it was clear. So we didn't have to differentiate using this. We just say, and it was kind of nice, but then, it was better than M underscore, which was the old style. But that fell by the wayside.
I picked up the habit from Martin Fowler's first edition refactoring book of using an underscore for all my instance variables. And it was nice for the exact same reason as that, because this isn't necessary like it is in JavaScript. Just, if it was an underscore, I knew it was an instance variable. And of course they were always private, right?
Right.
Bad for Beans, welcome. Yes, I am on the toilet. You've found my dirty little secret. I'm not wearing any pants. Boy, that one's going to get clipped, isn't it? I'm just...
Hey, Similar. Welcome.
All right, so let's write our first test. And the way I would do this, and maybe this is a terrible idea, but the way I would do this is I would start with either reading or writing. And I think let's start with writing. So we will pull in all of your JPO, JDO stuff pretty quickly, I think. And I would write a test that said, but I would do it a little bit differently. I would say, let's just start with a test called writes to database. And let's make a game database.
Okay.
Chat, one thing that always surprises people is that this isn't just a picture. This is actual, real stuff. Like
real
atoms.
Stuff. Unlike the virtual stuff I got behind me.
Yeah, but it's very pretty.
So create the class, I assume?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And here's where you got to put it in the right directory.
Right.
Otherwise, IntelliJ likes to put it in the wrong directory. Okay, great.
So, of course, this isn't the initial stages of TDD are an exercise of database design or API design. So let's make a method on this called save game.
Save game as the method name, or save game as the parameter. So save game like that.
Save game as the method name. Yeah.
Okay.
And if it was a game repository, I'd probably have it be game repository.save. But since we called it game database, save game just feels right to me. Yeah, and go and create it. And if you could do me a favor and have game database throw an exception, so I'm just confident that our tests are working.
Uh-huh.
Thanks, Bad for Beans. I knew I could count on you.
Sorry, hold on. There we go. Okay. And let's run this.
And did that fail for the right reason?
That failed for the right reason, yes.
Okay. So what I would like to do is I'd like to create a memento.
Okay.
A game memento, and pass that in.
Okay. Oops. So what do we need? We need... I can just copy this from a test I got, right? I can copy it from... I thought I had one. Yeah, we'll just create it. So when round completed, we'll say true. Roles will say 2. The last roll will say... Hold on. Before we do that, it's been annoying me, and I want to go fix it. I'm gonna go.
Sorry, what?
The memento. This parameter last roll has been annoying me.
Oh, right. It's current hand.
It's current hand.
Mm-hmm.
And every time and it's been annoying me. So okay. All right. So now I can say, thank you for indulging me. There we go. Okay, list of 3, 4, 5, 6. And what's the last parameter? Is a scoreboard.
And just leave that blank for now. We don't care about we're not going to start out worrying about the scoreboard.
So I'll just put null for that. All right. And you said you wanted to save that here?
Yeah. And the reason is that in A-frame architecture, we don't the lower level layers, the infrastructure and the logic don't know about each other. So we're going to pull out the data, the value objects basically, and give them to the infrastructure directly. Now it's really no different than what you're doing, except you call .memento in your repository, and I'm saying no, the application layer is going to do that work, but it's basically the same thing.
Right. That's interesting. That might have actually been a mistake on my part.
To pass the game in.
To pass the game in. I actually should not have passed game in.
Why was that a mistake?
It was a mistake because I should have passed in the memento.
Okay. Just that's because that's the way you approach the pattern?
Because, yeah, I don't know. I think I'm used to passing in the domain object because I only recently have I really decided that I like the snapshot memento. So this was a mistake.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think we had talked about it, so I was a little surprised to see you do that. But again, it's not the end of the world. The difference, though, is that it's a little easier to test when you're passing in the memento rather than passing in the domain object, because we can make the memento in any state we want.
Exactly.
Whereas if we pass in the game, you have to sort of manipulate the game to get it in the correct state.
That's what we did, and I hadn't thought about why is this so hard. Yeah.
Okay, so let's refactor our save game to support taking a memento.
Yeah.
I think you did that.
Yeah.
And let's stop throwing in an unsupported exception. See these tests pass.
Yeah, Suiji, I think so. I
sure
think
would,
so.
Although I wouldn't use the port at all.
Because otherwise, what else is it going to do other than just immediately extract the memento? Like it doesn't, it actually, and actually I was reading Mark Grant's pattern, and he actually creates an interface that is only about retrieving the memento. But I'm like, well, why don't you just pass in the memento in the first place? Okay.
I mean, that's how I use interfaces, is you're basically saying I have a capability of, serializing or memento or snapshotting.
Yeah.
I'd call it snapshotable or something like that.
Right.
And but I like just, simplify, just pass in the memento directly.
Yeah.
Although I don't know that what we're doing is memento the way I understand it anymore, but that's okay. Really, it's a game state value object.
Yeah, and that's why in fact, in another implementation, another project, I actually call it member is the object, and I call it member state. But I don't like state in the name, because then you have confusion with the state pattern.
Can we rename it to safe state?
I kind of prefer snapshot.
Yeah, snapshot works for me.
So we want to rename memento to snapshot.
Mm-hmm.
So this is snapshot, not span shot, snapshot. Sure, go.
So yeah, Suiji,
go for it.
Well, what we're going to do, if you need a game, we're going to ask the game database to give us a game. You're never going to create a game from scratch. If you're creating a new game, then you just create a new game and it sets up its own state. Naughty Raccoon, I'm not. So I've never been really good at understanding all the details of like the nitty-gritty pattern definitions, but the way I have done databases in the past is having a state object that actually is manipulated by the domain object that is then passed around. And I think that's how we had defined memento previously. But because the way Ted implemented this is to create the snapshot on the fly rather than storing it as the state, that to me is the difference between what we're doing and calling a snapshot versus what we were talking about doing before and calling memento. Whether those are actually reflecting the actual patterns, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I think for me the difference is memento is supposed to be an opaque object that only the thing that interacts with it, the owner of it. So in this case, memento would be opaque to everything else except for game. Game would know how to interact with it. Somebody else could hold on to it, but they wouldn't know what to do with it. And that's why I think this isn't memento. This is more snapshot, where we want to take out the current state, basically whatever makes that object what it is. I almost think of it as like it's its memory, and take that out and put it just into a value object. So it's still a value object, but it's something that then is transparent to other places in the code, so the repository or database can actually get the actual content and persist it, and then reconstitute it later and create one and hand it back and say, here's where you are. Yeah, so Suiji says the same thing. Yeah.
I don't know if you saw the message from Dota there.
Oh, Dota Attitude. Hey, 17-month subscription. Awesome. Wow. Nice to see you. Thanks.
So it's about time for our first break. What should we do? What are we going to do next here? So I think what I would want to do next here is I would want to assert that the database had a particular schema. And I think that's what we're going to write next. So let's take our break.
Okay.
And then
figure that out.
Back.
All right.
See y'all in a few minutes.
And we're back.
So yeah, we're going to assert that it has the particular schema that we want. So let's do that. And we can do this really incrementally. So we can assert that we have a single table with a single column in it, because the tool is going to auto-generate the schema for us, right?
So what? Yeah. So not sure where we're heading in relation to the tools that we have. So are we still going to we could create the entity object and then it auto creates the schema, or we could write the schema use a tool called Flyway to then have it generate, basically run the schema definition language, and then the object points that. So I'm not sure. Basically, I'm not sure what pieces of what we have were you thinking of using?
I think that's a really good question. So I know that people are working with stuff that like JPA that do things magically for them. And what I want to show is how you can write really good narrow integration tests even when you're using that sort of magic.
Okay.
And show how those narrow integration tests can serve as documentation for the magic and also protect you against the negative effects of the magic. So I do want to use JPA. Okay. I want to use everything that you've already built.
Okay.
What I want to do, though, is I want to have it work for real against an actual Postgres database, not the in-memory database. And I want to basically have two sets of tests. Well, three, if you think about it. The first test is going to be, we're using the JDO to write to the database. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to assert by looking at the database and looking at the actual schema and tables. So we will pull the rows out of the database and say that we expected there to be exactly one row and it has this thing in it. That's the first test. The second test is we're going to populate the database with some data. We will manually write rows into the database, mm-hmm. and then we will do a load. We will have the JDO, automatically reconstitute an object for us, and we'll assert that we got the object back that we expected. That's all really straightforward, and you might think, well, why not just, save it and read it and see that it works? The next thing we're going to do is we're going to write corrupted data. We're going to use the same structure that we used to do our previous test, because that will require us to make some helper methods like write this row quickly, stuff like that. And we'll put in 2 scores for the same category and the same game. Mm-hmm. And then we'll assert, and when that happens, we expect to get a game corrupted exception back.
Okay.
And we will repeat that for all the different things that we care to do. And we'll end up with a really nice set of tests that test, because when you're doing an infrastructure wrapper, the vast majority of the work and the attention needs to go on the error conditions. So we're going to put a lot of tests around where all the ways that this can go wrong. Does it handle it appropriately? And if we do a good job of doing our helper methods, then the tests will be short, and they'll be like, build rows with this, blah, mm-hmm. and see this exception. Build rows with this and see this exception. And when we're done, we're going to look at it, and it's going to have to be this beautiful documentation of exactly how the magic works. And what that gives us is, in the future, when we change the magic or we upgrade to a new magical thing, we will know that it's still writing to the same underlying database rows in the end. So we can change the implementation without changing the test. So does that all make sense, what I'm trying to accomplish there?
Yes. So that's going to hit areas, especially once we get into sort of lower level stuff, that I'm going to have to...
That you haven't had to figure out yet?
That I'm going to have to figure out, because that's lower
level.
Yeah,
I was a little worried about that. Now, we don't have to do it this way, but we've sort of been hand-waving what did good infrastructure tests look like mm-hmm. up until now. So I thought, wow, this could be a really good opportunity to do it. But I do know that we run the risk of spending the entire stream on how do we write SQL? How do we actually run SQL and get away from the magic?
Well,
I'd like to see it too, Suiji, but we're actually going to be able to.
Let's see how far we get. And we've got chat here to help us as well. So, yeah.
And the clear thing is, even though the tests are going to be operating at the low level, the implementation code is going to be using all the magic that's available to us. We want to take advantage of that. We just want to know that it works. Somebody mentioned earlier in the chat that, I don't remember exactly what they said, but the tests are proving that we're incanting correctly, right? That's what worries me about magic, is not, does it work, but do we know how to make it work? Mm-hmm. And that's what we're testing here. And also that we're in control. Not just of the happy path, which is easy, but all the weird edge cases, which is hard.
All right. So,
No, I haven't seen that, Suiji.
uh, okay. So, um, how do we want to sort of assert this? So what's
Well, so we're going to start out really incrementally.
okay.
Now, typically, when I've done this in the past, uh, I've set up the schema and like had just sort of a bare database that was available. I'm not sure how JPA works with regards to that. Since we're using the real database, not the in-memory database, there's some constraints. But what we want to do is basically put a transaction around the whole thing and then roll back the transaction when we're done so that the result of any given test is an empty database.
Yeah. So
But
that
whether that empty
yeah
database has tables in it or not is an open question.
so we get that for free if we do data JPA test. It basically wraps um, it wraps transactions around the methods.
Okay. And your previous tests, were they hitting the real database or were they hitting it?
Well, they were hitting a real database. I mean, the fact that the database was running in memory is a configuration concern.
Okay.
Because I could have pointed it to the Postgres database, and the results would have been exactly the same.
Right. I tend to, because different databases have subtly different behavior, I would tend to do this against the real Postgres database, not the in-memory database.
Right.
But I'm not going to be dogmatic about it for the purpose of being on stream.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the nice things is there's a tool in there's a tool called test containers that will actually spin up a new production, a new Postgres database, run the test contents, configure it to run against that database, and then when it's done, it basically shuts it down. So you get all the benefits of you're running a real database, but it happens to be a completely clean kind of thing, and also happens to run really quickly. And that's what I have in my Ensembler application. Is it does those kinds of things.
Yeah. Now the in-memory database you're using, that's not provided by the Postgres folks, right? It's just fulfilling the interface.
So the in-memory database that I was currently using is H2, running in memory mode as opposed to file, because you can also run it as file-based mode as well. I mean, it's a full database, but it is not. It's going to have some differences, especially in terms of schema creation, that are going to be different from Postgres, which is actually what I don't use it anymore. I only used it because it was one less thing for me to sort of configure and set up yesterday.
Right. Yeah. So if I was doing this for real, I'd use the tool that you're using for your ensembler and talk to the actual Postgres, just because those little niggly differences between databases can bite you in the butt. For doing it on stream, I don't think that's necessary. So I'm going to sort of defer to you on how you think it would be best to approach this.
I think we've got a Postgres up and running. We'll just run it against that.
Okay. So when does JPA write the schema out to the database?
So that happens basically during startup. So when it starts up and it sees stuff for.
And does it do automatic migration as well?
It does not do any migration. It basically does a drop and which is why you would not use it in production. It basically does a drop and recreate.
But it will do that. So like basically when we're done with the test, it will leave stuff in the database, right? It'll leave the tables in the database.
I think so.
Yeah. But then if we change the structure and then run the test again, it will just drop the tables and make new ones. And
right.
Our tests will continue to pass. Yeah. That's my main concern. I don't actually want to test that we have the right schema. I just want to test that we have the right rows in the schema. So so let's just assert that we have a table or we have a row. And so basically what we want to do is select from the game table that we have a row with let's start out with this number, the number, or actually let's start with our state that we have a single row with a single column that says that the game has started, or whatever that true corresponds to, which I don't recall.
And so you want me to write this at the level of basically a select?
Yeah, I want you to write the SQL statement. So probably
Okay.
a prepared statement would be the way to do it.
Well, I got to get the right configuration from. Let's
You've
see.
got to incant correctly.
Yeah, I've got to get the right whatchamacallit, data source. So let's see. Yeah, I'm probably going to want to use the simple JDBC template. It's basically bootstrapping us to connect to the database that I'm a little unclear on.
Mm-hmm. And for what it's worth, for everybody watching this, writing these narrow integration tests, always a major pain in the ass, because you do have to sort of figure out all this stuff, and they tend to end up being really long, complicated tests as a result. So we're going to do all this stuff around getting the database connection and making the query. But in my mind, that complexity is worth it, because it allows us to really make assertions about the nitty-gritty behavior. And it's those edge cases that I find are where programs fall down, and I want to make sure they're done properly. And it also just gives me a lot more faith that I've done it correctly and that I understand how things are working.
All right, so let me put the configuration. Do I have an application properties? I do. Okay. So we want Postgres. And this is going to be 32. It's not. This is Postgres. That. What else do I need?
Hey, Donnie, Ted will have to answer that one. I haven't done anything with the ensembler stuff.
That's actually that'll be what we want. Not sure if I need the driver, but we'll add that in. Oh, I gotta go add that into our POM file. So I'll leave that there. Actually, I'm not sure what we need there. Let me grab it. That's what we want. Might need another dependency, but that's the one we want right now. Okay. That's good now. So let's see. So what do I need to auto wire here?
Nadi, basically the issue is that whenever we're dealing with external state, like a database, things can happen to it that are outside of our control. And we need our code to be robust against those things.
I think that's auto-wireable. Oh, Escoho, thanks for the Prime Gaming sub. Nice to see you. Oh, Danny Russ asked about Zoom conference. I don't remember. I'll have to look at the ensembler code to remember why I did that. That was probably unintentional. Okay, so got the data source.
I really appreciate you figuring this out, Ted. I know it's kind of a pain in the butt, but I think it'll be interesting to see where it takes us.
Let's see. What if I can?
So Naughty Raccoon says data source dot get connection something and then prepare statement.
Well, let's see what data source has on us. Get connection. And
I see a create statement. Is there a prepare statement?
there's prepare statement. What I want to do is I want to do something simpler, which is just like get catalog. And I want to basically make sure that that just gives us something. Just so I can make sure that I have the connection. Then we can go do a prepare statement. But I want to start with something simpler to make sure we've got something working.
What does get catalog do?
It just gets the schema catalog name, so everything is sort of name spaced, I think. Mm-hmm. But basically, I just wanted to see that this actually does something. So let's run this test.
Yeah, that's a good point, Whiskey. We probably need to close that connection. Or will the test do that for us? Will Spring do that for us automatically?
Spring should do that for us automatically. Okay, so we got, and actually I wanted to, oops. That. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, so what we see here in this mess of output is here it basically drops the tables at the end.
Right. Okay, good.
So it creates it, alters it to add some constraints for foreign key stuff, and then the test basically drops it. Mm-hmm. All right, so now we know our connection is valid. So let's go pull that out into our connection, delete that. Connection, error statement. Okay, and so...
And because this is the test code, we probably just like hard code everything.
Yeah, so we're saying insert into...
No, just select, because we're expecting the game to do the insert.
Oh, right. This is the assertion part, right. So... do we know what the table name is?
I think we should decide, because this is API design, I think we should decide the table name. Do we have the ability to control that?
Yes.
I assume we do.
Yes.
Yeah, so let's call the table game.
So do you do singular or plural for your table names?
Generally singular. What did we do in that little design document we wrote?
We use single.
Yeah.
I only ask because I remember DBA's yelling at me for not using plural.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't really
we
care.
Can call it. I don't care.
I was just curious if you had an opinion. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a strong opinion, but sort of my default is singular. I don't know
why. So select from game.
Nowhere. We want to get everything.
Yeah,
back
we want to get
a
everything.
Single row.
Okay. And
so yeah, we need to just run that SQL statement. Is there a method that we can call that's just gonna do it?
Yeah, so we can do execute.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an execute query because it is a query.
Actually, if you go up, there's an, yeah, there we go.
Yeah, because we actually want data back.
There was an execute that took a string. I think we could probably just use that.
Wait.
Oh,
you're saying?
Oh, maybe.
Well, there's execute, but that just returns a Boolean.
It was this one.
Yeah,
I thought it was on the connection, but I was mistaken.
We could do this one. I'm not sure what the difference is.
Yeah.
It cannot be called on a prepared statement. So, okay. We want this one. Yeah. Okay. And that gives us a result set.
Okay. And
then we can assert that result that, what have we got on this?
Oya has done this before. So does your assertion library not give us the ability to just compare against the result set?
Depends on what we want.
Because what I'd like to do is just say, given the result set, here's the stuff we expect, and like just put it all in.
So it's going to because it's assuming that there's n number of things in it. We have to basically first sort of navigate the cursor.
Can we turn the result set into a collection?
There's probably a higher level API. But yeah, this is basically streaming it from the database. So this is pretty low level.
Yeah. So this is exactly the kind of thing, you know how I talked about custom assert libraries? This is exactly the kind of custom assert I would create that allowed us to compare a result set to a hard-coded list of things.
Yeah, I mean, result set is because the data there's no types, so you'd have to basically dump it into some kind of anemic map that was basically only strings or something, and that's why so you basically move the cursor and then you say, okay, this column represents an int, and so I need to get it as an int, and that's why nobody uses this level pretty much ever, unless you really are needing this kind of control. But normally you're, I mean, this is why libraries in Java exist, is because working at this level is really kind of painful.
We'll abstract it pretty quickly, and it won't be so painful. Okay, well, let's just do it the hard way to start out with, just to see it work.
So let's do next. And so what we want so we need to actually do this, and then result set.
That will give us the first row.
Yeah. Then we can say gets what are we getting?
So the result set is going to be, so it's going to give us a row back, right? What is the actual data type that we have here?
So the first one is presumably a Boolean because it represents this guy. That's the order we're going in. And then we can assert that is true.
Does the result set have column names associated with it?
It does. You can find it by column names, or you can use it by indexes. So in order to get it by column name, you basically have to say result set. Oops, not that. Result set. What is it? Column. Find column, and you give it the label. So we could do that, and then that returns the column for that thing. So if we wanted to say this is round completed, then we could say that's the column. So this is round completed.
Yeah, I think that's sort of where we're going with this. And probably what we will end up doing is making some sort of assertion abstraction that will allow us to assert on result sets, given, say we want an array with an array of maps, and the maps are column names to data types, something like that. And that's what I thought your assertion library would just.
It does. I just have never used it, and it's not a built-in one. It's an optional one. So let's go grab it because I never use it, and that's why it's not there. Because it's a separate dependency.
Let's get this working for a couple of things, and then maybe we can go grab that library.
So, okay. Do you want to do additional assertions like on this? How far do you want to go?
Let's stop there and make this pass. But actually, I feel like the get Boolean is a little bit too iffy. Instead of doing round completed, let's do the current round or whatever the number 2 is.
That's rolls.
Okay, so let's do rolls. Just because.
Yeah, I agree. Booleans can accidentally be correct, and you wouldn't know it. Yeah.
Right. So let's assert that we get the rolls.
And this will be get int, and then we can say it's equal to 2.
Yeah.
All right. This will most certainly fail because it won't find game.
Yeah. Whiskey's put some nice stuff in the chat.
Yeah, so I can pull that in. Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. What I was when I was saying, is there an assertion that will do this for us?
Yes.
That's exactly the kind of thing I was imagining.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just it didn't come up because it's not built into the core. Assert.j has like 5 different extras.
Okay. Yeah. So now what I'd like to do is pull in just enough of the JPA magic to make this one column work. Mm-hmm. So I assume that means that we're going to want to copy the DBO, and we're going to want to copy a few things out of what you've already got.
So we're going to create basically a new entity. So I'm gonna actually I don't need to copy it. So let's go.
Yeah, I would probably just copy GameDBO and then delete everything except for the one part we care about.
What do we want to call this? Game table?
Yeah, let's call it game table.
So then we can add entity, and then we can say
game table a lot because it's very explicit.
And we can say game.
Yeah, Suiji, I don't want to use the existing GameDBO, even though I think it would probably work because I want to build it out incrementally. I want to use the existing GameDBO as sort of our inspiration, and I expect we'll end up with exactly the same thing, but I just want to see it sort of happen incrementally, so we have to test drive it.
Okay, so let me flip this over. So what do we need? The only thing we're asking for, but we can throw on the other one. So Boolean round completed, and one is int rolls.
Actually, I don't even want to do round completed yet. Just the rolls.
All right.
We'll bring the round completed in when we have a test that's failing.
All right. Let's see what happens. All right, so that's good. No data is available.
Oh, well, because we haven't saved it yet.
Because we haven't saved it. Yeah,
but it did create the table for us.
Presumably.
Yeah. Suiji says JPA uses plurals by default, so maybe we should call it games instead of game, just for consistency. Do we already have a games table?
We don't, so we can make it.
because it just went with the default, which was convert the class name into the table name, right?
Yeah. So what it does is it takes the table, the class, unless you specify at table, which is what I did here. It takes the name of the class and converts camel case into underscore separated, and then tacks on an S.
Got it. Oh, and it tacks on an S.
Yeah.
So at this point, we probably don't need the at table because
then it would call it game tables.
Oh, we call it game table. That's just charming.
Because it takes the name,
the literal name. It doesn't.
Literal
it's
name.
not enough to strip the table
No,
off.
no. It says because if you want that, then that's what the table annotation is for.
Right. Well, then you call it game table.
Not confusing at all.
All right. So why is that squiggled?
Oh, just because IntelliJ is saying it looked at the database and couldn't find that table because it's not there.
Right. That would be a good reason for it not working. Yeah. Okay, so this should fail for the same reason because we haven't changed anything other than the name.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
And so we can see.
So now let's save it.
Yeah. So
let's implement our game database.
So I just want to see where it actually. Yeah. So here it created table games. Big Int for the ID, and then rolls integer, not null. So perfect.
Right.
Good. Okay. So now we want to actually save. So let me close some of these. Delete that. Delete that. And in here. All right. So what do we want to do here?
Just poke the magic switch.
Okay. So so you want to use JPA to save this.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we're going to need to well, I guess technically this is repository. And so we're going to need to going to need to create so it implements CRUD repository. What was that? Game table? Or is it not?
What's the long for?
Because that defines the identifier. This got moved to the wrong thing. Because by definition, it says if you're basically creating an entity, it must have an identifier. All right, and then it's not a class, it's an interface. And it's not implements, it extends. Okay. So then from here, where our game database GPA. And inject the constructor. And then, so here we will need to create the table. So game table is going to need us to generate given setter for roles. And then we'll set roles, snapshot. Why don't you just write it for me, IntelliJ? And then we call our JPA to save our game table. All right.
Okay, that should pass now, right?
Should. What happened? Constructor.
What is the full error? Cannot be applied to given types.
What happened?
Look at GameDBO again, or let's look at your spike code.
Well, I'm actually trying to understand this error. So it says needs game database JPA found no arguments.
What's the link there? What line number is it pointing to?
So it's got a problem with, well, it's basically pointing to here, but it's basically a problem here.
Oh, no. The problem is on line 24. We literally aren't passing in game database JPA. Like we are actually, it's a proper syntax.
Oh, it is here. Right. Because we're instantiating it. Hold on.
So,
sorry, I just need to put that in. Okay. So this just needs to be injected. It was pointing out on the left side, and I was looking at the right side. And it's like, what? There's nothing on line 24. What are you talking about? And we want game database JPA. And then I'm going to kind of hand that in.
Right.
Okay.
Still no data.
Hmm.
Is it rolling back the transaction before the test finishes?
No, it's rolling it back after it fails, I assume.
Dangerous assumption. Are we ever pressing save? Are we calling save? Yeah, Suiji just asked the same thing. Oh, we are. We are calling save.
There's no way to... there's only just save.
And that's synchronous? It doesn't return until it's done?
It should be synchronous, yes.
Are we calling save game in the test?
We are calling save game in the test.
We're getting a connection. Is the save game happening inside of a transaction?
It should be in the same transaction, but this is
if we're getting a new connection on line 33 after we've done the save, that may not be the same transaction.
That's certainly possible, yes.
Can we get...
Yeah. Right, because this is running in a transaction. The transaction hasn't concluded until this. So this connection
is the wrong connection.
Can we get probably a new connection
to us?
I don't know.
Because that's probably what we need. We need JPA to give us its transaction or connection or whatever.
I don't know. This is now into an area that I just don't know enough about.
Okay. Well, for what it's worth, whenever I do narrow integration tests, this sort of stuff comes up because you do get down in the weeds. So this is pretty normal. Yeah, Mihai, I think the problem, we don't know what the issue is, but I suspect the issue is that the game database save game is happening on a different transaction than the prepared statement execute query. And if that's the case, then nothing we do will ever show us any data. What we need is to be operating in the same transaction.
Yeah, I think that stuff is
Sweetie
is
says, do we see
annoying.
the insert in the Hibernate log? We don't see an insert in the Hibernate log, do we?
So this Hibernate log is not um, I wonder. Oh, it's why is it starting the embedded one? You know what? Let me pull out. I mean, not that that should matter. Let me pull out the embedded database.
You think it's creating the table in the wrong database?
Well, I don't want to. I want to eliminate that as something that I don't want to see.
And
But one thing I know about the Hibernate log is that it is not always complete. It doesn't always show. There's some changes. There's some settings you have to do. But what I'd like to see is, does it? Okay. So it's still starting the embedded database. It should not be doing that.
And Mihai is also makes a point about doing a find all on the JPA repository.
Postgres. Aha. Okay. So now it's complaining because it can't create the data source for embedded data. I don't want. Actually. How did I do this? Hmm. So what I don't want it to do is to create the embedded database. I don't remember how to do that.
Hey, let's check this in and push it so that folks in the chat can experiment as well.
So this is broken. So yeah, it's something about the replace mode, but I don't know. So let's see. JDBA test. I think that's what I want. I think it's this. That's right. Let's try that. Okay, so that's better.
What happened?
In that could not extract results set. Let me just look at the database startup. So it is using Postgres. So that's good. And began the transaction. And so it couldn't. Let me turn on this. So it's complaining about Hibernate sequence.
Not extract results set.
So game table. Let's not have it generated right now. And so when we save it, let's set the ID to 42.
Column game table 0.roles does not exist.
Okay. Well, that's good. This is just the name, the local name it uses. So it's saying that roles does not exist.
Okay, but it should have created that for us, right?
It should have, yes.
Roles do not. What's the ultimate source of this? Like, what's the line? Where's the stack trace?
It's deep inside of, so basically save game. So it's attempting to save the game.
Save?
Yeah.
So this is exactly why I like to run against the real database, not the non-real database. It looks like, yeah, Whiskey says automatic DDL seems to be disabled now, and that's exactly what I was thinking, is that it's not creating our schema for us, which makes sense. If you're running against a real database, you don't want to automatically wipe the schema.
That's not the contract, though. I think it's the replace that's doing that, because you explicitly have to either supply the schema or you have to explicitly turn off, because the default mode of Hibernate is to create the DDL for us. Let's see. So it found it. But yeah, I think because of the replace database, it's doing the select, but it is not creating it is not creating the schema for us.
So if you comment out in the test, if you comment out the assertion, does it, and the prepared statement, is it still failing in the same way? It should be, right?
Sorry, say again?
So let's reduce our scope of error here. Let's comment out line 35 through 41.
Yeah, I mean, it's not getting there. So.
Yeah. But when we get this part working, I want the test to pass rather than us getting, because I've had this happen so many times. I've fixed a problem, the test error has changed and I haven't noticed. And then I've, gone on and beat my head against the wall for another couple of hours before realizing, oh no, I fixed that. But, or worse, I undo the fix.
So let me put in, explicitly ask Hibernate DL auto.
Mihai says maybe replace equal none turned it off.
Well, that's pretty much my suspicion. Wondering if specifying create drop will force it back. If not, we might have to manually create the schema, which we could certainly do. All right, so that was it.
Green bar, good. And that is exactly why I wanted to come out that assertion. because I don't know if that assertion is going to work. In fact, let's do it one line at a time. Yeah, and even result set.next. Let's just execute the query and see that work. Kind of wanted you just to get the connection, but
Yep, so that
okay,
works.
Good.
I think we could do the rest.
Okay, result set not positioned properly.
So
I'm guessing that our result set is
So is result, let's, let me go do something in the POM file. Let me go add in, not that, where did it go? Go grab the Fluent, there it is. I'm gonna go grab the assert.j specific library here. And let me actually put it in the right place. And let's wake it up. All right, and now let's see what that gives us. Asserts.
Can we just have it like dump out the result set for us, like it to a text?
Let's see. So how do we use it? We want.
I saw a toString when you press dot. I guess that's just default though.
Yeah, that's just default. So we want. Oh, I see. Okay, so we say table, give it the data source, give it games. So it's even at a slightly higher level that maybe we want. Because then we can do assert that table dot column. It's supposed to be. Assert that.
This is good though, because it presumably knows how to make the connection work for us. Well, it depends if it knows Spring or not. Spring Boot or not.
Oh, in this case, we want, it's using the other one. We want the org assert jdb API assertions assert db db API assertions assert that. And that's the one we want. That's awkward. Okay, and then column. What did we say? It was roles. Then from there we can say value, and then is equal to. And then we can say
I'm a little worried that we're introducing another abstraction on something that wasn't working.
Yeah.
So let's see what happens.
Yeah. So this. So
once we get this working, I think this tool will be great. But
so one thing I wanted to check was not number of columns, but like a count.
It has number of rows.
Has number of rows. So we expect one.
Yeah.
So let's see what happens there. Because let's see what happens.
Yes, that's exactly what I thought was happening.
Yeah.
Okay, so the problem is we still, after all that, are not connected to the right transaction.
Right.
Let's take a break.
Okay.
And come back in a couple of minutes.
Alrighty. All right, and we're back.
Okay.
So Mihai, what we're trying to do is we already have code that does that, basically at the repository level, does a write, and then does a read back and confirms that what should have gotten written actually got read back. What James is leading us through is basically use JPA hibernate, but then dig into the table itself at a very low level and confirm that was actually written.
And the reason for that is that ultimately what's being written to the database does matter. And so we want to test that it's working the way we think it is. It's a way of staying in control of our code. And because it will fail eventually. So when it fails, it's better if we know how it works than not. Because all this pain we're going through right now is not something we want to go through when, this system is down. Because something's gotten corrupted somewhere. Or somebody has done a manual query against the database and accidentally overwritten some data, and now nothing works. So it seems to me, Ted, data source is what? Data source is given to us by Spring. GameDatabase JPA is given to us by Spring. What kind of methods are available on GameDatabase JPA?
Pretty much ones related to save and find and delete and count.
Yeah, and if we do to find all, it would give us a game database back, right?
It would give us an iterable, basically would give us the list of...
It would give us a game table, right? Which is too high level.
Yeah. So one thing we can also do is actually get at the other underlying...
That's what it feels like to me, is that we are missing... We need something injected to us that we don't have. What does the entity manager give us?
So the entity manager is this... basically manages connections and persistence and also the cache.
Right.
So what I'm wondering is if we can do...
well, there's some create query.
So this create query is not using SQL. It's using the query, the JQL, or all sorts of different names. So basically the higher level.
Well, that's okay. We don't need to use literal SQL. We just want to know is what we want to do is get at the structure of the database rather than the higher level abstraction that Hibernate is providing to us. So that might be an option. Can you continue to scroll through here and see what else we have? Join transaction. What is that?
Basically says whatever transaction is active, but that is, I think it assumes a JTA. I don't know that we've got one of those.
Yeah, looking at that, it's saying that if we create our own transaction, what about set flush mode? What does that do? I'm going to make a note of things that look promising. Set flush mode looks promising.
Yeah, so it could be that doing a flush might be sufficient.
Let's keep looking through and see what else we've got in here. What does find give us?
So this is basically what Spring Data calls underneath. It basically does
that's
this,
too high level.
Yeah, that's too high level.
What about get reference?
I think that's pretty similar. So lazy fetching.
Okay. Keep on going. That looks like everything.
Yeah.
So is there a flush call?
We can do a flush on the entity manager. I don't know. I hope it's the one that's involved in the transaction.
Before you run the test, it's fine. But let's comment out lines 49 and on so we don't get an incorrect failure. So Sweegie suggests that we disable transactions altogether.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good idea. Mihai asks if the repository has a flush. GameDatabase JP is our repository, correct?
Yes. Yeah, so underneath, I think the save, I don't know if it does a flush. So yeah, so Whiskey Sierra is sort of saying what sort of I'm suspecting is that the data JPA test is starting a new transaction per I forget what it does per test. I forget whether it's test method or test as a whole. And that's not going to be accessible.
Yeah. And that's why I was wondering if join transaction was it, because that's what we need to do is we need to get the underlying connection that the entity manager is using and make our query using that.
Yeah.
Entity manager is a Spring thing?
Entity manager is technically a Hibernate thing or a JPA thing.
Okay.
So it's basically one step down from Spring Data.
Okay. I Googled it. Stack Overflow says that we do entity manager.unwrap and then pass in this java.sql.connection. And the Whiskey's .get delegate looks like it might be promising as well. What does unwrap do again? What's the documentation on that? I remember looking at that and thinking that doesn't sound right. Yeah, well, let's try that. Let's see what happens.
So that's, I'm not clear what the class is. The class of the object to be returned.
Java.sql.connection.class is what Stack Overflow says.
Okay. Oops. So that's basically connection. Good class.
There's a variety of responses on that question. So let's start with this one and see if that works.
Let's do
that.
And then this is going to be, where'd it go?
That should be the literal connection.
Yeah.
Capital C connection. .get class.
Okay. It's just .class.
Or just .class, yeah.
Sorry.
All right, nice try. So I got another thing from the same Stack Overflow question, which is that we can ask for get entity manager factory. No. Yeah. Let me just type it in.
Okay.
So where are my, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we tried the flush. That didn't help because I think it's still not there.
Okay, that's not all. Okay. What is that complaining about?
It's saying there is no get data source on.
Let me double check this. Ah, that would be why they put it on 2 lines. Okay, give that a shot. I mean, we're just shots in the dark at this point, but
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to try, and let's see if this works. So we got our connection. That connection, okay. Is we can ask the entity manager to detach.
and we're pretty confident that this means that there is no results in the.
So what is next return? So let's assert. Let's not just do this, but also wrap it in. Assert that it's true.
Yeah, and then we can, because we don't care about anything other than that. Let's actually comment out the other tests for now.
Yeah, because all we care about is that the result actually true is what we wanted, right? Yes.
Yeah.
False.
So the work that we're doing on line 48, it might actually be connecting to the right connection, but I don't recall how transactions work.
Yeah, I don't think the connection is the sort of, I think, physical connection, but the transaction is around that.
Yeah. So even if we've got the right, we're still not going to be inside the transaction if we've got the same connection.
So one thing we can try is, let me go back to this one and then comment out that. And basically, before we get the connection, let's do an entity manager. Attach. What does this say? So managed entity
will not be synchronized to the database.
We can flush and then detach. And then detach. We don't have reference to the object though.
That's a great dumb question, Pellet. Let's check that. Maybe we do not call result set.next on the first query.
I assume that was double checked for us by the assert.
That's correct.
J, because it returned 0 when we asked for a number of rows of 1. We could, I think. So let's.
I'm going to just double check the result set documentation, and
I mean, we can comment this out and then do this. I think this will fail because it's going to complain that you haven't moved the cursor.
Yeah, initially the cursor is positioned before the first row, according to the documentation.
Yeah.
So
so that's what I expected to get. Perhaps you need to call next. Yeah. So this is what we want, and I think we're. I could do the sort of detach from the save side. Do we want to try that? Because
in the production code,
or I could return the object that got saved. But basically, I need to sort of evict. This is all the stuff that's somewhat of the downside of JPA is it's holding on to stuff and really tries, in service of optimizing, tries to not write things until it actually has to.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's not something we ultimately want to do in the production code, but for the sake of understanding why this isn't working, I think this is the kind of thing that often I'll write in the tests before I do anything else. Just get it all working in the test and then to the point where we understand it.
We've gotten that.
And so you're expecting that that will basically evict it from control of Hibernate, and thus it would work.
Oh, well, we don't have an entity manager. Why was it no?
Don't you need to pass it into the constructor?
Oops. Yeah, so that's still failing. All right. So Zampirate suggested why not mimic what data JPA test is doing, and so maybe do less than it's doing. Test entity manager. Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm glad we can make you feel better, Pellet. Yeah, what would happen if we disable transactions completely? Suiji mentioned that a long time ago,
Yeah.
way back in the chat. And I think just because our intuition is that this is a transaction issue, but we don't actually know that. So if it works after we've disabled transactions, then that is useful to know.
So we can try that. Which transactional is this? One.
Oh, yeah. By default, tests annotated with @data JPA test are transactional rollback at the end of each test. They also use an embedded in-memory database. What if we take out @data JPA test? What would happen then?
We wouldn't get a data source, and we wouldn't get the database JPA. So we basically wouldn't get any auto wiring of. Well, we would. Would it be the production one? I mean, we could do Spring Boot test.
Well, actually, I don't want to derail. First, let's try the turning off transact.
I'm not sure which. This one? It's that one. Okay. I'm going to delete some of these. Okay. All right, so let's see then if that
I'm
works.
looking at documentation, so I'm not seeing what you're doing right now.
So the test just passed.
Oh, it does pass if we disable transactions. Where did you disable transactions?
As an annotation. So basically, don't propagate the transactions.
What does propagating the transactions mean?
So
So I guess, Suiji, we should have listened to you 20 minutes ago, and this would all be working now.
So I think it's basically, I don't know what this does. I don't know what non-supported does.
Right. I was
So-
just looking at the transactional documentation.
So if we do this should be the same thing.
Non-supported is execute non-transactionally.
Ah, okay. So that's interesting.
What happened?
Somebody must be cleaning up the database
because it didn't add another row.
Right.
Well, no, we're setting the ID to 42. Well, but it's not a primary key anymore. Can you look at the database? Like, is there any way for us to like do a manual query and see what's in the database?
I can go to the database. Oh, that's right. The auto drop is probably doing it. Right.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's the problem is that if we do two tests, they will stomp on each other.
Right. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's still a primary key. It's just that
right.
I forgot we were setting the ID explicitly. So it's basically doing an upsert. So it's doing an update if it already exists. In this case, if we did run it twice.
So our hypothesis is that this is now working because it's immediately saving the data. We're not operating in a transaction.
Right.
But that as a result, we're getting the data sort of left in the table. So to prove that hypothesis, we should if we cut and paste the test and run the exact same test again, the second one should fail because the data already exists with the same primary key.
But save it does an upsert, so if it's already there, it will do an update. If we increment the ID, basically assign it ourselves and increment it, we should end up with 2 in the second test, even though we would want 1.
If you go back, I mean, we might as well make the ID auto-generated again. Like, there's no reason to hard code it.
I always forget what it is.
I just want to know that we know why it's working or not working.
Let's try just like that. So if we go back now into here, what's that? And we don't set the ID. Okay.
So this should still work exactly the same.
Right. And in fact, we should also be able to assert
on the ID column.
Yeah, on the ID column.
Mm-hmm.
Value is greater than 0. Actually, let's say greater than 42. I want to see it fail and show us an ID.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So 1.
Okay. So yeah, cut and paste this test exactly, and we should see 2 tests, and the second one should say 2. Well, actually, the second one will fail with having 2 rows.
Yeah, that would be my expectation. So let's grab this. And I actually don't need any of this. Okay. Yep. Yeah, so we get 2 instead of the 1 that we expect.
Okay, so this is good.
But that's fine because the yeah, so yeah.
So we need an after each that basically not drops the table, but deletes everything in the table. Or a teardown, I think is the term in Java.
It's after each.
Yeah. Oh wait, hold on one second. Back that up. Type at after transaction.
But there are no transactions.
What'd you say?
There are no transactions though.
Yeah, I know. I'm just wondering, like, it would be nice if it was using transactions, but I think beating our heads against that wall further is not super useful. So yeah, let's just do after each. I was just thinking, well, if it's got after transaction, then it has the ability for us to programmatically.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if there's a way to get to the transaction in progress. But yeah. So we want to do. Do we want to drop the database or just delete all rows?
Yeah, delete. Let's just say delete all rows.
So we got game database JPA, delete all. So now this should pass.
Whiskey says truncate games, which is probably what I would have done, but this will also work. Yeah. But because just for sort of keeping everything at the same level, let's grab a connection and do a truncate SQL call. So we're obviously going to want to start factoring out this stuff.
Execute statement. Okay.
You can auto-generate the after each from the command in menu.
Oh yeah, I could have done this. Although it doesn't have after each, it only has after class. That's interesting. Okay, table, what do we call it? We call it games. And I want to execute.
Whiskey, you are so right. In fact, we all have the I accidentally deleted the database story. And my I accidentally deleted the database story was exactly this type of situation. We had a script we would cut and paste into our SQL console. I don't remember what the name of the tool was. And we pasted it in and ran it and didn't check that we were connected to the correct database first. And of course, it generated the entire schema, deleted everything in the database and generated the schema for us, which was really handy, except it was the wrong database. That was the day that we discovered that the database backups had been working perfectly, but the database restores didn't work. Test your databases. Test your backups, folks.
Test your backups by restoring, not just looking at the backup itself. Yes,
that's right.
Oh my gosh.
If you've never accidentally dropped tables, are you really a programmer DPA? I think the answer to that has to be no. Yeah, and it was in production.
Yeah. I did that fairly recently on my ensembler. I did something. It's like, oh, let me just do this manually, and I forgot the where clause.
Oh no.
And so I was like, oh, good thing I had a backup.
Yeah, well, transactions are our friends, right? You do it, then you query it, and then you commit the transaction.
Yes.
Anyway, we fixed that. So that was a learning experience. We fixed it by just modifying our script to fail, or it wasn't even a script. It was just SQL commands. I forget what it was called. Anyway, we could modify it to fail if we did a query on the database name, and if it was wrong, then we dumped it, and we should have done that from the beginning. Right. And I'll tell you, I have learned that lesson. I will not write anything that doesn't check to make sure it's on the right database.
Yeah. And always have backups.
Yeah, and always have backups
that are actually tested.
that you've successfully restored.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know the backups on my computer work because I, I restore stuff all the time. But yeah.
So, do you want to drop the second copy now that we?
Yeah, now that we've proven it works.
Yeah.
So let's clean this up
Do we want
and
to?
let's go ahead and use, I like this table
Okay.
assertion. So let's start using that properly.
I'm gonna go and.
Yeah, that used to be a static import, didn't it? Didn't it? What's happening there with your
So I didn't want to get confused between the assert that is the non-database one and the assert that is the database one, unless we think we're only going to do assertions against database, in which case I'll fully statically import it.
No, I think okay. So they're actually different assertions.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I wish they would have named the one in the DB assertions.
Yeah, that
as
is
the class. I would have not done it that way, but whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to assert that it has the right number of rows, and then what we want to assert is that it has the exact columns we care about. Is there a way for us to do that?
Let's see. That table has columns.
Not has number of columns. Is there like just a dot columns?
We can, on a column, if we said ID, we could say just we could say contains values. If it has
Hold on, I just need to recognize that we've almost made it to the stream without Whiskey mentioning Kotlin.
You're getting paid by JetBrains there, Whiskey?
I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little bit overly pedantic. I kind of wanted to say that we didn't have any columns we didn't expect to have.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I'm not sure that.
I guess, is there a has number of columns?
This has number of columns.
Let's go with that. Let's just say that we have one column.
Yeah, I was just looking to see if there's anything else. Yeah, it has number of columns.
What is this described as?
That's just a test thing. So when it fails, you can describe the failure message more in a more custom way.
I see.
So, all right. So let's do that. Oops. And so we're saying
start with 2, right? Actually, let's put the well, yeah, carry on. So that should pass.
So let's see it fail.
So EG, it does have a column method.
Okay, good. Oops.
What's the name of this library that you're using?
It's assert.j, and it's assert.db. Is the I'll throw it into chat. Oops.
I just want to look at the documentation.
Yeah. I don't know why it's not. Why are you not letting me paste? That's weird. It's not letting me paste there. It's letting me paste there. That's weird.
Thank you.
Why? OBS, what are you doing to me? Okay. Get columns to check. What did that do? Did it not download the documentation for that? Huh. I don't know what that is. All right. What What did we want to do next? More
Now we just want
columns?
to incrementally, add columns. Yeah.
Okay. So let's assert that. Let's go ahead now assert that round completed. That should be true. So this will be, we'll get some error relating to it's not there.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully.
Yep.
Perfect. That's good.
That's exactly what we expected. So now we can go ahead and add and completed. I don't know why I expected to autocomplete that. And let's also create getter and setter. Now it'll fail because it's false instead of true because we're not writing it. Although I guess technically it's null. Oh, whoops. We didn't update the number of columns.
Let's comment that out until we're done.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking we should put that at the end, but
oh yeah, could do that.
I think ultimately what we want is exactly what Suiji's saying, which is assert that table columns contains exactly, and then we'll just put out the whole thing that we care about. But we'll do that later.
So now we need to copy that. So set round completed to snapshot.
Set round completed, not set roles.
Oh, thank you. Set round. It's sort of the same thing. Snapshot. Snapshot. Now that should pass.
This experience that we've had today is so typical of my experience doing narrow integration tests, by the way. Lots of beating your head against the tooling to figure out how it's working, to understand it.
Yep.
Often with some just guess and check, and then sort of gradually figuring out a mental model of how it works. And then once you get it working, then bam, 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 being able to iterate fairly rapidly until you get to the next challenge, which for us will be doing reads as well as writes.
So we got round completed roles. This is current hand. And we want that to be equal to...
Let's just say XXX and see what comes out.
I don't even know what the type of the column is.
Exactly. That's why I'm saying just put XXX and see what comes out.
Well, this will certainly fail because we don't have that in there. So it'll just be the column doesn't exist. And now we can do private list. I guess I can start copying from GameDBO. So this is element collection. Oops. There we go. And that. Okay, so now it exists. It will most certainly not be equal to that. Yeah.
What is it equal to? Is it telling us? No, current hand does not exist. Is it making a second table for us?
Because it's making a second table for us.
Yeah.
Game table.
But that's not what we wanted to do.
So if we, what do we want it to do?
Well, we originally were going to use the array or data type.
Let's see. So how do we do that?
But I just want to call out, this is why we do it this way. Because originally we said we wanted the database to work in a particular way. You implemented the code thinking that it was going to create that database, and it didn't. And you didn't.
I knew it wouldn't create that database. I just was I I don't,
You don't
know. I at that point I didn't care.
Right. Fair enough. Fair enough. But I'm just saying that
Yeah.
doing it at
Yeah.
this low level gives us a lot of visibility and control over what's going on. And I think that's important.
So let's see. So how are we going to store this as an array?
Yeah, Whiskey, that is exactly right. This is like 90 miles an hour from wall to wall. I do want to point out the time, Ted. We should probably start wrapping up.
Yeah.
Time flies when you're beating your head against a wall.
Oh, is that what feels like? Let's see. I think if we do column definition.
Speaking of walls, here we are. My old friend. I really like that.
I think we can do that.
The assert DB gave us this hint. That's cool.
Oh, this is a list of integer. So is this number?
Oh no, that's the truncate that failed. I see.
It doesn't like attribute. We'd have to turn it into an array. List array type. List array. Ah, okay. That's what we want. Thank you, Vlad Milcia. Okay. So we want that. Where does it import that stuff from? Oh, that's a dependency. All right. So if we instead said int array like that, it's still not liking that. So there's a way to do with some utilities, but I think I don't think there's a way to do it without importing something.
Well, maybe we stop here.
Yeah, maybe we stop here.
This is probably something you can figure out offline, and we'll come back to. So yeah, we. So your thoughts based on? Well, I'll let you finish typing this in and doing the commit.
Just take a note. Okay. Yeah, I'll have to see what the library is, and it might be something, or there also might be another way to do it. But that looks like the way to do it. Okay. Okay. Any other notes? No, that's what we're all picking up. Okay. So I gotta be honest, like, I feel like this low level stuff is not useful at this low level, because I feel like the way I've tested it, that I test reads and writes, that if I can read back what I wrote, that's sufficient. That
you're treating your database as an opaque data store, and you don't actually care how it's stored.
Right. So it is specific for a scenario. If I'm working with an existing database, then I would have to use a lower level. Although I probably would not have knocked my head against the wall for this much. I would have dropped to one. So there is a different way, and I didn't think about this until we were really heavily into it. You can run SQL upon startup, and I would have just put the SQL directly in a separate thing, assumed that it did the right thing and then I was able to read that. And I think I've actually done that.
Sorry, explain that a little bit more.
So you can create an SQL file and have that automatically executed when the test starts. So you get a little bit less control, and it's a little bit split into a separate file. But then it would do possibly even the creates of the table, the inserts, and then in my test I would assert that I can read it given my existing definition.
But how would that? Because what we're testing is the GameDatabase.SaveGame. How would that work?
So the save game would. Yeah, the save game. As long as I can read it back, then I'm fine with that.
Yeah, that would potentially work if we were doing testing the reads from the database.
Yeah,
because we could set up something that writes to the database and then we read back. So it's interesting. So I see where you're coming from. And if we didn't care about the database, if it was just sort of an opaque blob, then I would say, yeah, writing and reading back is sufficient. But you may not recall last time we decided that we were going to treat this as, because you said, well, let's just, one of our options was, let's just serialize it to a string and store the string, right? We said, no, we're going to write to tables because we want to act as if this was a real database. So I think that's the scenario we're doing here, is saying, yes, we've got a database that we're working with and a schema that we want.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that I'm considering the database completely opaque. I'm just saying that I think testing it the way I've tested it, that I can read and write through using Spring data, that I've configured everything correctly, that it restores completely the object that I saved it. That's sufficient for me to be comfortable relying on it. And I
understand that.
My experience is that corruption in databases, honestly, I haven't experienced it since I worked with sort of enterprise databases where there were multiple applications hitting the same database.
No, and that's what I meant by the scenario we're simulating.
Yeah.
I want to actually because people always come to me and say, how do you do this database? I don't want to do the easy way. I want to say, well, what if we are going against a database with an existing schema that we have to conform to, and that other applications are reading and writing from? That's the scenario I want to play here. And so in that scenario, then I think we have to do this, because it's not good enough to just let the tooling make tables for us. We have to conform to the tables and schema that already exists. Right.
So
I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, and I think we are, because I'd agree that if they're like over the past few years, certainly even before that, there was a sense that the applications I worked on owned the database, and there was nobody else reading and writing from it.
And that's a much cleaner way of doing it. Even if you're not doing microservices, even in a modular monolith, I want each module to have its own database or namespace tables or something that it has total control over.
Right. And in fact, that's what's great about aggregates and repositories, is that's your separation. So even within a module, you would have, so like my ensembler is one module, but it has two aggregates, one about members, one about the ensembler events. And therefore, it's even smaller than the module, that it's really at the aggregate of those objects. And so it's a really clean separation. Like I could put those in two separate databases. I could store one of them remotely and the other one locally. It's completely transparent to everything else. So obviously that's preferred, but I agree that if I was reading from somebody else's, where I was not the primary writer, or if I was, but somebody else is writing to it, and I couldn't stop it, then yes, I'd do this.
Yeah, and the reality for a lot of people is that they're in an environment where they're not working in a greenfield, where they've got an existing system that they've just got to work with.
Yeah.
I think by the time we're done with this, we're going to have a really clean abstraction that you would be willing to use in any situation, because it will be easy. There's always this beat your head against the wall to figure out how to demagic the magic. But once you've done that, then it's worthwhile. Yeah. So, figuring out the magic is not fun, but now that we've done it, it should be fairly straightforward for us to just keep on rolling with it. Yeah. Although we'll probably continue to beat our heads against things like, well, line 24 on the right, trying to figure out how to make
yeah,
that
I mean
work.
that stuff I feel like we can figure out. I mean, at worst but I think so yeah, and we'll figure stuff like that. Those feel like more like speed bumps as opposed to a wall, like the transaction stuff.
But I mean, this is how I do my narrow integration tests. I do want to know that the code I'm writing really works. So I will, for example, if I'm doing an HTTP client, I will write in my test an HTTP server.
Mm-hmm.
And I will have my code, even if I'm doing something like you were, where you were using the Spring stuff to do the query, I will have that query hit my server that's in the test.
Right.
And then I will assert that the server saw the queries I expected.
Yep.
And that is always a pain in the ass.
Yeah. Yep.
And usually the part that's painful is the magic. Like, how do I get it to code against the right server? You know, stuff like that.
Right.
And but it gives me such a feeling of confidence and control over my code. Like, I know exactly what this is doing. I know exactly how it works, so that when I make changes to in the future, I'm confident I haven't changed anything.
Yeah.
Because if you've got a running database and you make some sort of minor change to a DBO somewhere and it changes the schema, all your code just broke and you don't know it. But with these tests, your test will fail.
Yeah, well, I would know it because I manually do the thing, and it would I don't auto generate the schema. But I agree that if the migration went off, then I may not actually know about it. That's something I could.
I mean, maybe you've done
see.
something that changes the schema. You don't migrate, but you've deployed anyway.
Yeah.
And then once you've deployed, the deploy fails because now the schema's wrong, right?
Yeah.
The database schema does not match what the system expects.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. The database migration tools protect against that, but they don't. But they require you to use it properly, and it's certainly easy to make the mistake of writing the wrong schema and then it migrated it, but not in the way that your object now recognizes.
Right. And also, I want to catch my errors before it goes into the continuous integration pipeline, because that's going to take a while. Whereas if we've got the tests running here, then we can detect the errors sooner.
Yeah, I mean, even for migrations, I'll run that locally because it's really fast. Because it's all running in a local Dockerized thing with actual data. So I make sure to spend some time on that. One thing that's interesting is, like, now I want to write some assertion library additions that assert some of the stuff that we wanted to assert more easily. I'm not, and it wouldn't be terribly hard because the tooling is already there. So
yeah, I think what we'll do next time is we're going to write some more tests. We're going to do the reads as well as the writes, so we'll see what our body is, and then we can just factor out a function that's just assert table has or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And we'll pass in a table name, and then we can pass in a map with column names and data, and just have that all come out. I'm kind of surprised assert DB doesn't have that already, and maybe it does.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think it was designed by somebody for a specific scenario and it worked for them. It doesn't work for us.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, there's our time. Hi, XJJ, you've come just in time for the end of the stream.
Yeah.
So thanks for watching, everybody. As usual, the recordings are going to go up on my site, jamesshore.com/s/nullables-livestream. And if you keep an eye on jamesshore.com, you'll see the Nullables training announcement come up sometime this week. So keep an eye out for that too.
Yep. And both James and I have Discords, so hang out, join us for conversations outside. And we're also pretty active on Mastodon, so you can find us there as well. And that's it. Thanks for all your help as well, and helping us not bang our heads against the wall as much as we probably would have.
Yeah, there was a lot of head banging. Yeah. Thank you, Ted, for going through that and figuring it out. Yeah. I'm glad we made some progress there.
Yeah. All right. Have a good rest of your day, folks.
Bye.